So first of all, thank you very much, and I would echo again, let me just encourage one more time, we love this when these are interactive presentations. It just is much more interesting. It allows us to get to more information that might be of concern to you, so please feel free to interrupt us at any time, not a big deal. So I am going to introduce my partner, Doug Manns, who many of you, I think, have already seen give portions of the presentations that we've done in the past. Doug and I are partners, and together with a third partner, owners of the HYM Investment Group. You saw some of the members of our team who are here tonight, and we're really proud to be here working with you as we seek to move this project forward. Tonight is going to be a night in which we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the specific items that Bob and the mayor have asked us to do. And so I'm going to begin with a little bit of a update on urban design issues and opportunities for us, some of the issues around and I'm looking at our agenda, by the way, which is hopefully in front of each of you. I'm going to talk a little bit about urban design issues, and then as we get into infrastructure related issues, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Doug, who's going to go through both infrastructure as well as resiliency and conservation issues, which we sort of see together with resiliency issues. So tonight is a night for us to dig in a little bit more deeply into this, and I would just remind everybody that we're taking on a big project here, and remember on this first slide. So I just, one thing to remember right off the bat, this is a very big site, 161 acres, and one of the themes that you'll hear from us tonight, remember, is on this site, which is operated as a horse track, there are basically no utilities, none of the kinds of pieces of infrastructure that we need to bring to this site. All those expenditures, all that work, that's all work that we will take on. Anything on the site, new parks, new roads, and everything that goes under those roads in terms of site utilities and all the rest of it, that's all on us. And that's a lot of what it is we'll be talking about tonight. But remember, again, just to orient you to the site, here's the Beechmont T station. We're going to show you a slide in a little bit, in which we show the border between Revere and East Boston, but that border runs basically along this line through Sales Creek, through here, gets to around this area, and then makes a sharp left turn to the border of our site, and then comes around this way, so that these tanks, as well as this portion of the site, is all in Revere, as you may know. In addition to the Beechmont site, though, we have the Suffolk Downs T-stop, which is right out here, over some of the folks' shoulder this way, and then Constitution Beach on this side and Revere Beach on this side, together with Belle Almar. So we see this, again, remember, this is a site, particularly for people who were not here with us last week, one of the themes for us from an urban design perspective is opening this site up and making this site accessible to the public for the first time in its history, in its 80-year history. It looks beautiful from the vantage point that we have here, but for the public, for 80 years, people have not been able to walk on that beautiful green in the middle of the track. Instead, really what we're doing now is opening that up and using this as an opportunity to create something really great. So what is our vision? Our vision is to create a mixed-use, walkable site. That's the most important thing for us. We want this to be a place that, yes, creates jobs and has commercial development, but to do that, we need it to be a great mixed-use place where people will live and want to go and shop at the retail, eat a meal, things like that. Remember, the retail that we're thinking about is not big box retail, it's neighborhood retail, and we want these streets to be great streets for people to walk along. So part of what I'm going to walk through tonight is how do we get to that by using the building blocks of a plan to get to that point. So here's the plan in its full presentation, again, to orient you to the border. So this is the border along Sales Creek. See if you can see this dotted line that runs along Sales Creek in the middle, and then makes a left-hand turn toward the border of our site and runs this way. Everything on this side is in Revere. So about 109 acres are, 109 of the 161 acres are in Boston, leaving approximately 52 acres in Revere. So it's about 52 acres in Revere, a very big site for Revere, very big site for us, but fortunately all located right on the Beechmont T station. So let me run through some of the details. So we begin first with the open space network. So remember, this is, for us, this is the most basic building block. And hopefully people will remember that when we first acquired the site, we bought the site in May of 2017. We really, from the get-go, decided that the open space network needed to be large, needed to be very public, needed to be special. And so right from the get-go, we said that 25% of the site would be dedicated to open space, and this is true open space. So this is not, it's not like we're calculating the streets and the sidewalks and all those things in that piece. We're thinking about true open public space. And this open space can have a variety of different types of characteristics, but it's true open space. And this is what that open space network will look like. And as you can see, we see it as central to the entire site. So this is a kind of a central park here that runs through the middle of the site. I'm going to come back to that in one moment. And then these are other pieces that link back to that, connecting all of the site back to that central feature, that central open space. In general, there are distinct neighborhoods that kind of make their way around the open space, as you can see. So there's at least 4 neighborhoods. We see ourselves here in Beechmont. We see this as a very distinctive neighborhood that will be, fronted right on the T station. Remember that this neighborhood will be 50% commercial and 50% residential, as per our agreement with the mayor and with the city council. So among the commercial uses, and Doug will talk about this in a little bit, will be hotel, retail, office, lab, those sorts of uses, a hotel, all those pieces in those uses, and then residential as well on the other side. So 50-50 on that piece. These are also other neighborhoods. These are in Boston for the most part. This is near the Suffolk Downs T station, a mix of residential and commercial, just to kind of give you that sense. This is perhaps a more residential site in through here, just because it's oriented a little bit more towards Orient Heights, which is a substantially residential neighborhood. This in the middle, number 3 here, is kind of a mix of residential and more commercial, I would say, again, given the fact that it's more centrally located in the site. So again, coming back to that central common. So here's the central common. This is 15 acres. And as you can see, if after we're done, it still will be light out, presumably. And you can go out and kind of look from the windows here to get a sense of the size of this. But it runs basically from a cluster of trees to the right of the pond that's out there, all the way down past to Sales Creek. So it's a big chunk of open space, 15 acres in total. Again, public, we want this to be very activated by the public. As we think that through in terms of, these are what we call precedent images. These are images that we think about in other open spaces, other parks. So some of these are Central Park in Manhattan, other parks around the region. So this kind of gives you a sense of, we want it to be public. We want it to have a variety of different types of activities on it. It could be passive, could be very active. And then we want to add what we call green fingers. So these are these pieces that come down right through here, kind of in a north-south access toward that main park. And the green fingers are part of a water management system. So Doug's going to talk a little bit more about this as well. But when we think about this from a resiliency perspective, we know that the site over time will be subject to some flooding. And so over a 100-year period of time, this site is measured in terms of the possibility of flooding on 100-year increments. And we know that there will be some flooding, just given the sense of what's happening in the world and all the things that are coming our way. These are green fingers that will be green during 99.9% of the time. But when there is water that will come in, the green fingers will conduct the water back to the central open space, and we will create a stormwater management system. There's no stormwater management system that exists on the site today, so we're going to have to build that as well. And that stormwater management system will appropriately manage the water and run it off-site as the storm subsides. So those are the green fingers that run through, again, this north-south access here. And then we think of an active and linear park. So if I come back to this piece right here, this spot right here is what we call an active linear park. So this is a park that we want to have be very active for exercise purposes, for the public, for walking, for whatever. And these are, again, precedent images that give you a sense of the kinds of things that we can bring to that space, different ideas. And these, by the way, these are great opportunities for us in working with the public, for you to give us your ideas, your feedback, and your thoughts on what this open space can look like. But that gives you a sense of how that lays out. This is what we call the sort of the canopy strategy slide. So this is a slide in which we sort of illustrate for you where there will be substantial new tree planting along the site. So again, thinking through the open space plan and where we expect to plant trees and the like all the way through. So there will be a canopy of trees along the pieces here, as you can see it on this particular slide, a variety of different types of trees as we think it through. So again, here's a slide that kind of sums up. This is hard to read in the back, but basically here's a slide that sums up the open space network with kind of an active play spine that runs right through the middle of the site here, a main green that kind of runs right through, again, through the middle of the site that will have a piece of play attached to it. It'll have quiet space attached to it, but all of that connects back to some key civic nodes as well. So here's a node that we think of as being right here, just outside of what we call Belle Isle Square here. So this is a civic building here, so this could be music, gathering, community space, but then that kind of spills out onto the green here. Here's the pond that exists right here. So we'll keep that pond, and that is right here in this picture. And obviously what we want to do is have there be multiple gathering spaces for the public. And again, this can be music or community space or community gathering. This is an outdoor theater, so this is a space located here. This is fully located within Revere. So this is a gather space as well. This can be for outdoor performance. Sorry, one more time. This can be for outdoor performance here, obviously, or when there's not an outdoor performance, it can be a place for people to just gather and have a meal or have lunch outdoors. So we think of these as great spaces, great civic spaces. We want them to be great places for people to gather. I'm going to just run through a little bit more and then hand this over to Doug in a minute. This is a slide in which we talk about the hierarchy of streets. Essentially what this means is there are a variety of different types of streets on the site. As you would imagine, as we think through, these are smaller blocks within the Revere portion of the site, and these are therefore smaller, kind of more neighborhood-oriented streets. 2 lanes, just 1 lane in each direction. Some of these streets, like Tomasello Drive, which are meant to manage more in the way of traffic through the site, Tomasello Drive will have more lanes, so therefore it will be a wider street. So this slide kind of is meant to illustrate that as you go through. But in each of these streets, there will be bicycle-related tracks that will allow people to ride bikes. And each of the bike lanes have a kind of a different character associated with them. Again, Doug's going to run through some of the width of each of these things. But there will be designated bike lanes or cycle tracks, kind of protected cycle tracks on each street. Each one, again, has a slightly different character that we'll go through in detail in a moment. We want this to be a pedestrian network that can be very, very robust in terms of pedestrians being able to walk anywhere in the site. So this is the pedestrian network that includes a variety of paths that are essentially community paths. So for example, here, coming off of Winthrop Ave, this is a community path that would connect back to Revere and allow people to pedestrians to access the site here. And there are other community paths located elsewhere throughout the site as well. These are pedestrian loops. So I identified that one spine that kind of runs through the middle of the site, and these are full loops that allow you to walk or run 1.5 miles or 1 mile, or your choice, basically, of different loops throughout the site. It's a big site. Just the distance between Beechmont Station and Suffolk Downs Station here inside the site is a full mile, by the way. So it's absolutely possible for us to create an open space system that creates loops that are really useful and good for people to be able to exercise or walk and really make use of, especially a nice evening like this. So as we think through the connection to existing assets too, that transportation system, that hierarchy of streets, plus the bike connections, produce great opportunities for us to make great connections both to the T stations here, these are kind of our front door, but also to create connections, both pedestrians and cars, off-site as well, as we think this through. Again, we'll go through some more detail on that in a moment. This is a service and loading plan. So essentially what we're saying here is each of these buildings, the buildings that we are planning, we're thinking about these pieces as buildings that have front doors that are appropriately set on appropriate streets. Again, this is a hard slide for me to kind of go through in detail because it's hard to read in the back. But the idea is that we're thinking carefully about where the front door of each of these buildings should be and where's the loading for each of these buildings as well as we go through this whole plan. And then obviously this shows you where the lobby locations are. So if we think through the servicing of the buildings and where those pieces should be, we think about where the lobby should be. So for example, let me just show you on this slide here. This is the Beechmont Square area that we're thinking about. This is the innovation building here that we've proposed. And then this, for example, this is a hotel here. Obviously, we want that lobby to be right on that square, and we want there to be a very active entry point. And the same is true for these buildings here. So these are lobbies located here. Again, activating that square with retail on both sides of those lobbies. Again, further activating the square as we think those things through. There will certainly need to be bus loops on the site. It's such a big site that to get people from place to place, certainly to the T stations as an example, we'll need to think about various bus loops that will connect people to different parts of the site, that will allow people to connect, to their office or to their home or to a piece of retail that becomes kind of their favorite retail. So this, we're thinking about internal bus loops as well. This is our retail strategy. Again, you've seen this slide, I think, before, but essentially we want retail to stretch and be very active from Beechmont all the way over to the Belle Isle Square section to the Suffolk Downs T-stop. And this is a loop that, again, will be about a mile at least with retail on both sides. Again, making this a very active walk as we go through. And this kind of gives you a rendering of that retail piece in the midway point. So just, this is approximately in this area here. This is in the midway point with great restaurants, outdoor seating, walkable streets, all those sorts of things. And again, I think we did this civic note previously. So with that, I'm going to give some of the details on Streetscape back over to Doug.
Great.
I'm still here, able to answer questions as well.
Thanks, Tom.
Any questions at this stage in the process, folks? Joanne?
Tom, I got a couple of questions. Oh, thanks. So as the president of the Friends of Belle Isle, I know you have a lot of wildlife in this area, and I think when you start building and you're bringing in people to use the open space, you're going to create these, coyotes and whatever we have out there, the bunnies, to move in another direction. We feel that they're going to move across the street to Belle Isle. So what we want to do is we're going to push to not have dogs there, so we can keep that sanctuary just wildlife, because the dogs intimidate the wildlife. So I hope you could work with us with that.
Yeah, we'd be willing to work with you on that, absolutely. I mean, we were up at Orient Heights, at the Orient Heights Neighborhood Association on Monday night, and Gail Miller was there, and she kind of gave me a heads up that that's where you guys were heading.
She's the perfect person to talk to.
She
yes.
is, that's for sure. So so we're prepared for that. And honestly, I don't think I've thought it through enough right now in terms of what the implementation is of that and all those different pieces, but we will absolutely work with you on those issues, yes.
Okay, I have one more question. The MBTA in Beechmont is in really bad shape. I was wondering if you're going to work with the MBTA to clean it up and to make it pedestrian friendly, because right now you can't even cross the street without people getting, almost killed. So.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely.
You.
As I think Counselor, we've spent a lot of time with the MBTA already, which has yielded some benefits already. So we certainly spend a lot of time with the Blue Line team and with the MBTA team themselves. We do, as you know, we have a plan for what we think the first level, the ground level of that station can look like. We'd love to, for example, open up that area where the Beechmont roast beef place is right now. We've made an offer to purchase that property, not to build a building there, but to frankly open that up and make that a much better civic plaza. That also gives us the chance, if we can get that property, that gives us the chance to work with the MBTA to create a bus turnout and a bus drop-off that is more effective than what happens today. As you know, people coming down Winthrop Ave, a bus coming down to Winthrop Ave to stop and drop people at that station stops, messes up the traffic in the whole right-hand lane that's trying to turn right, then backs out. It's a mess. So the whole plan can work better, and we absolutely want to be part of that solution. We've thought very carefully about that. We want to do that.
It's the condition of the train station that I'm, concerned about, because there are tiles missing as you walk in. Yeah. Everything is rusty. It really needs, a facelift. So
we definitely want to be working with the MBTA to update on that.
Great.
Too. Yes.
So, Council, one thing I would say too is that we actually have been asked by the MBTA to do a code report of Suffolk Downs. We're actually also doing it of Beechmont Station. So we're doing a full code report, and we'll also be looking at the impact of our property or the build out on the demand for both stations too as well. So the code reports will be included or part of the next submission that we do for MIPA. So we are looking more just beyond the ground plane too as well.
I love your pants.
How about that? The stripe? How do we look? You like that? Stripe? Yeah. Counselor, yes.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. As you know, my neighborhood is just across the street.
Yes, sir.
Past the gate community, and looking at some of the plans and the back doors and the front doors, I don't know if this is the time you wanted to pick something up or think about it later. But number one is where in those front doors, back doors, how are you going to handle trash containment? Knowing we have a large rodent issue in the city, all over the city, and along the MBTA tracks, and even in the marshlands, we have where the rodents live, and we know that when you start breaking ground, they're going to find a new place to go. So, I'm concerned, I'm sure Joanne's concerned about those rodents moving into our neighborhoods. We have a school over in my area, a school across the street on Bennington Street, and people are already concerned about the issue in the city of Revere, and I know this is going to exacerbate a lot, and I just want to make sure that you know that the people are concerned about it, and that we want to make sure that the mitigation on rodent control with bait boxes, baiting, a long time before you do your first construction. I'm not saying, I know we require 2 weeks, but I've been asking, large contract developments to do a month to a month and a half before. Because, these things know what's going on.
Yeah, so Doug and I will do a shared answer on this. So I would say, first of all, remember, each one of these buildings will be subject to a, what I would think of as a design review, essentially a site plan review of, so each one, so even though where we are process-wise, remember, we've completed the zoning, with you, and then we're now in the midst of the special permit or the PUD plan review and the plan filing and the plan, hopefully, approval. But each of the buildings will come back before you for that kind of plan review, which will give you and us the opportunity to discuss, here's our plan for where the front door is, here's our plan for where the door for managing all the trash pickup and the parking entry and all those sorts of things. So we'll work with you on that. I would just add, these are Class A buildings. The way we think of these are Class A institutionally financed buildings. These are buildings that are meant to stand the test of time and be investments that are able to be successful for 50, 60, 75 years. And so thinking about them structurally and thinking about how they're managed, we're very careful about all those issues, rodent and otherwise. So there's, we want to be both good neighbors to think about what effect it would have on that, but also I can assure you the buildings themselves are managed in a highly professional manner as well.
And I wouldn't expect anything less. But I just want to bring it forward, and I realize it has to go with site plan review, and they'll be picking up with it. But I just want to put it out front right now, so I know Frank deals with it on a regular basis, and I just want to make sure everybody has the package together. Two other small items, I believe, and I think, but you may think they're a little bigger. But the new intersection at Thomasella Road, with the change in the flow of traffic. Now, have you been dealing with the gate traffic flow, knowing that there's a new intersection by Domino's and
Yes.
Because when they come out of there, that's it's crazy now.
Doug's gonna go through some of this. We're gonna make our work has to fit hand in glove with work that's already approved or already underway. Yes.
Good. And one last thing, Sales Creek.
Yeah.
Knowing that you're still going to have the flow from Green Creek, and the Sales Creek behind along Standish Road. The flow there, I don't know if you know what's been going on with Devereaux and National Grid digging up the intersection and finding huge amount of hazmat down there. And a lot of that flow comes right into this big creek here. So I just want to, see if there's going to be upstream management, hazmat management, or if you're going to do, screening management, how that's going to happen. So just, it's a great concern to us, down on the Standish Road and Elliott Road.
Part of what Doug's going to do is he's going to talk about stormwater management, sewer, all the different basic pieces of infrastructure. So some of your question might get answered with our presentation tonight.
That's fine.
Is that okay?
I wasn't sure where it would fit in.
Is that okay? Okay.
Thank you.
Bob, can I just announce that the mayor's here, by the way? Mayor, thank you very much. How are you? Thank you so much for coming. Does the mayor want to say? Does the mayor want to speak in it? Bob, I just want to point out. No? Okay, good. Sorry.
And Ed DeVoe has a question, which,
Thank you. Staying with this map here, and I'm going to go back to one of my items that I've been pushing all along. We've got a lot of people that are going to be living in that area. We've got a lot of people from Ira's neighborhood, and that will be affected by the Revere Beach Parkway. I know there's going to be work on crossings and lights and stuff like that, but I want to once again push for a walkover, up and over the parkway. Because when you think about it, with the amount of people that are going to be living there, because we have Revere Beach and access to Revere Beach, they're going to we want them to make this a walkable city rather. And so they, to promote that whole thing, they need better access to the other side of the road to get to the beach. And I really think that and I don't know if it falls within the infrastructure or whatever, that sort of planning, I really do believe something like that needs to be there. And then the last one, the second one, disrelated from that, but when you were talking about the green space in the pond, any way we can make that like an ice skating rink in the wintertime?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things, that's an easy one. One of the things on the slide was a skating rink. So we absolutely think about that. And, I think about that as, Frog Pond, for example, and the common where you can rent skates and all that sort of stuff. That would be great. I think we're all subject to, how many freezing days do we get right in the future? But hopefully it freezes and we get, I would just add one quick thing on the walkover. We'd love to do that, okay? But as we get off our site, we're less in control. So we need help from other parties, right? There's an Mbta parking lot there. That might be part of that solution. The DCR runs that road. They could be part of the solution, or maybe not. There are professionals there that are nervous about the slope of that road and the traffic, but we're deep into that right now, trying to help figure that out if we can. Yeah.
Just to follow up to that point, and I guess, you're working with the city, the area, to make this fit within the neighborhood. I guess I'm looking for state delegations, city leaders, and so forth to work with these guys to push the DCR or whoever else needs to be pushed to make that happen, because I think for this to be really successful, that needs to be a major piece to it.
We will continue to work with the state. The state delegation has been awesome with us, from the senator to the representatives. I mean, it's really, everybody's been terrific with us all the way through. But we will use every lever we can to try and make all those pieces work.
and it's certainly a priority of the city, and we've talked about it in some detail. I have a feeling that some of these questions, particularly the traffic questions, which we'll have a whole meeting devoted to that alone,
Yeah.
but some of the other questions might be addressed when Doug gets into his presentation.
Want me to
So
let him
why don't
go?
we move into that?
Just want to follow up with a couple things too, going back to Councilor's question. So every building will have a construction management plan, which will have a detailed rodent control section too as well on it. So I'm going back to your original question of, so we will have detailed construction management plans, which has a detailed rodent control section, and we do start in advance. And also because we already own this site, we may be able to do some things well in advance. And again, demolition will probably happen first, particularly of the horse barns, right, which actually is a good thing. We're going to really, but again, there's probably a few critters in there today. So we're going to be focused on that, just at least, kind of put that out there. I think it's really important to go through that. I had a series of other thoughts too, but I think what we'll do is just we'll keep going. I'm actually going to go, actually, no, this was the other one too. So the reason why we're showing you where service and loading was on this map was pretty purposeful, because none of the service or loading is facing outward to any of the neighborhoods around us. And that's both on the Orient Heights side as well as on the Revere neighborhoods too as well. The loading is really on interior streets, basically, so that we don't have any loading or service that's on Winthrop Avenue or on Washburn Avenue. And that's pretty purposeful from our perspective. So we do look at it very closely. As Tom said, as we come back with more detailed design, the site plan review, we'll actually be able to show you exactly where the loading docks are. They'll likely be where those locations are shown, but then we'll be able to talk about the scale of those loading docks. We also, again, these are professional buildings. These are all regular streets too. So our perspective is this is not some wide open loading dock like you'd see at like a grocery store or something. These are really roll down doors, very confined, and the trash and everything is kept inside. Right, so when the trash gets picked up, it's the day of the pickup. They might wheel them out, or even the trash truck goes in sometimes to get it too as well. But it's not like outdoor type trash, so it's always internal to the building. So just want to throw that out there. I want to take a step back, because I think this slide is pretty important, because I'm going to get into the cross sections of the street, or how the streets start to look. So I wanted to go back to this one to kind of get a little more detail of the cycle track versus designated bike lanes. So what a cycle track is basically, it's actually a raised facility, so it's not in the street. it's actually up away from the curb, right? So you might have your 2 lanes of road, you have a curb, and then what you have is a grass strip, and then you actually have a 2-lane or 2-way bicycle track, basically. And the reason why that's important is because, again, we're lucky, we're not like the Seaport. We can do this right from the beginning. So the cycle track network actually extends all the way through the site, and we're also putting a new one on Winthrop Avenue today, too. And I'll show you this cross-section a little bit later, but today, as you guys know, there's a road, you know, a lane, there's a curb, there might be a 5-foot sidewalk, I'm not really sure, it's kind of tight, and there's immediately a chain link fence, right? We're actually going to be giving at least 20 feet of our site to really expand that so that we actually will have a tree strip, a cycle track, another landscape strip, and then a sidewalk to really make it very beautiful on the Winthrop Avenue side. So we're actually giving quite a bit of land over here to really kind of improve or expand what's happening on Winthrop Avenue. And then when we get into the interior of the site, we do go back to typical bicycle lanes that are on the street, but part of that is because we're actually in the retail section now. So we actually want the bikes off the sidewalk level, we want them back onto the street because it's more of a pedestrian experience. And we'll kind of go through each of these as we go through it. But the important point was kind of pointing out that we're basically trying to interconnect our site, you know, basically re-stitch back Revere back to East Boston and provide a lot of alternative modes of getting around through the site. All right, so this is just a site plan, and what this is showing is that showing the typical section. So I think it's an important point that Tom said before. So there is, besides Thomasella Road, which again may not be a street in certain areas, it may just be a wide area of pavement, you know, it's kind of hard to call parts of it a street. We are building the entire infrastructure network on this site at our cost. We also, both the City of Revere and the City of Boston have also made it very clear to us, which we're fine with, that we're also maintaining these streets long term. We're doing the snow removal, we're repairing and maintaining them. We'll get into water and sewer. We're putting all new water and sewer lines in. We likely will give those to the cities because they may want them for control, which is fine. But the streets themselves are going to be maintained by us, which I think is a very important point too. So I'm just going to kind of go through the sections of each of these. And so what this is showing, if you look over here, this is a diagram. So this is our Main Street district. And then this is kind of a cross street that goes to the current shopping plaza. And what this is showing is a cross section. So this is just showing you how this sets up. So if you were to walk down the street, but it basically shows we have 1 lane in each direction. We have on-street parking. So again, parking for us is really important from a retail strategy. We want on-street parking on the site. And again, it's on-street parking for people to be able to come here to the retail, right, or visit the parks. It's not meant to be for our residents, like free parking on site. They should be parking in our garages. It's more about being in, for people trying to come visit the site. And then we have the bicycle lanes. And then we have very wide sidewalks, almost 20 feet wide in the Main Street district. Because again, this is the main boulevard. This is the real shopping experience. And you saw the rendering earlier where we showed the restaurants spilling out onto the street. So again, it just gives you a sense of that. And obviously we have street trees as we go through it. So this just kind of shows you a typical section of what that looks like.
Doug, can I just ask
Yep.
a quick question,
Yep.
2 questions actually. In terms of management of the on-street parking, are you planning to have meters? What kind of durations do you expect, et cetera? And a more general question, Boston is much more advanced than we are in terms of the specifics of a lot of design criteria, complete streets, et cetera. Is it fair to assume that all of the streets, whether in Boston or Revere, will be built to the and maintained to the highest standards required by either or both communities?
Yes, correct. So I think it's a good point to bring up. So Boston adopted what was called complete streets. I mean, they called it theirs, Boston Complete Streets, but it's being used across the country. It's a very comprehensive way of looking at, you know, how do sidewalks work, the width, how do you get the trees to grow better, how do you get the rain gardens next to the trees, so it's very comprehensive. Our perspective is that we're implementing complete street type guidelines on both cities, so it feels very seamless. You know, we'll definitely probably put a line, you know, when you cross over the border, you know, that could be cool, you know, but the idea is not to make it feel like there's a different, you know, there's a different scale or quality of it. Now, the neighborhoods that Tom showed, there might be more distinct elements within neighborhoods, but the idea is that the street guidelines will really be very consistent throughout the site, and that's very important. So again, I mean, this is going to be a very Class A type community from our perspective, so we want to make sure it's upscale. So curb management, thank you, because yeah, a lot of questions Bob always has. So a couple of things. So we definitely want to be regulated parking from our perspective. So we see that as 2-hour parking, maybe 3-hour parking. We also want it to be all the way into the evening. So we don't want to be back bay where after 6 p.m. there's no regulation, so then no one can use it from a retail perspective. We want it to be very active. Also, if I go back to this plan, we actually have on-street parking all the way along this park because we actually were the developers of North Point, and we had a 5-acre park at North Point. One of the biggest complaints from the neighborhood was there was no parking, so they couldn't get to the park to use it. And not everyone's within walking distance of that park. So if you're a mile away, that's a long walk just to get to the park. So again, from our perspective, we want it to be regulated. We haven't really thought about, whether it's charged, but it has to be monitored from our perspective. And, we have to also work with both cities to figure out if it gets to the point where it gets so busy, and because again, the other thing too, we're not only building the open space, we're going to maintain the open space. That's a huge annual cost. I mean, the prospect of us being able to do some metered parking in the future when there's enough demand, so we can help support it, may be great, but it's not our goal. Our main goal is to make sure that we want to get people to the site, which is more important. But it does have to be regulated because we don't want it to be filled with people, I'm going to go park at Suffolk Downs to go take the blue line to work. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking to, this is meant to create an active site so people can actually come and use it. So the next cross-section is kind of just here on Tomasella. Now this is a little bit different cross-section. So we have the wetlands on this side, so you can kind of see it here. And then our buildings are over here. And so what you see here is you're starting to see this is Tomasella. So Tomasella will be 2 lanes in each direction. Some of it's already 2 lanes in each direction, but it'll be continuous all the way through. This is because Tomasella is our main spine, basically. And the goal is to really have the traffic circulate through the edge of the site as we go through it. But then what you get, again, you get this condition of you have this line of street trees, and this is the cycle track. So this is a 2-lane cycle track. Then you have another line of trees, and then you have the sidewalk before the buildings. So it creates a nice little buffer along, especially Tomasella as we go through it. But it also significantly encourages bicycle riding too, as well, which through the site, which is really good. And again, some of these get very similar. Again, as you get through here, this just again shows you the full length of Tomasella. Again, very similar. So you have the 4 lanes of traffic, you have the 2 lanes of the cycle track, and then you have the sidewalk. Now, as you approach, when you get towards Winthrop Avenue, you actually have buildings on both sides, because again, that wetlands goes a very long side of our site. Here, though, you actually have a sidewalk on both sides, and again, the cycle track that comes through purposely connects to Winthrop Avenue to connect to the other cycle track, which is really important. But again, and then here you actually see a 5th lane, because again, when we approach Tomasella, we have a left-hand turn lane, so this cross-section gets a little bit wider. Now these are the linear parks. This is where it gets really kind of cool. So again, as Tom talked about, we have these really cool linear parks. So again, here we call this the Park Road. So again, you get a very similar circumstance here where you have 1 lane in each direction, parking. Now again, there's no parking on Tomasella, which is purposeful because Tomasella really is a major thoroughfare. But as you get into the Park Road, you are getting parking on both sides. You get the cycle track, which is actually in the park. But separate of the cycle track, you also have a community path because this truly is a cycle track. So you have a very wide community path for people who want to walk, or when the toddlers are on their low bikes. And then there's more of the, the passing through on the bike trail there, the cycle track there. Then we get into more specialized sections. This is the park section, and this one's actually cut right here at the pond. But it gives you a sense of, again, there's the cycle track in the park. There's 1 way in each direction. There are some pinch points where we only have parking on one side because the site can get tight in some areas, but and there's a sidewalk there. And then you can actually see this is that major open space, and there's some grade changes, but there's several community paths that actually walk through the park. So, but again, just gives you a sense of the cross-section.
And Tom, Doug, just so everyone knows, all of these exhibits will be available on
Correct.
your website.
Absolutely, yep. I believe we posted the last DAG presentation already on the website too from 2 weeks ago. This just again shows you another linear park. Some of these start to feel similar, but again, here's the linear park. Here, because this is a quieter street, instead of having a cycle track, we actually put the bicycle lanes back onto the road because it's more of a side street, but you still have the community path that kind of goes through the park. Again, this is just it's a flip image, but there's another linear park path system there. And then you get to these smaller side streets that are really internal. Here you get back more to a residential character where you have sidewalks on both sides. Now they're narrower. So instead of being 20 feet wide, they're more like 12 feet wide. But by the way, 12 feet wide is very wide. A typical sidewalk could be as low as 5 or 6 feet. These are still pretty wide sidewalks. But then we have some on-street parking, bicycle lanes, and the travel lanes. This is just showing a condition along Orient Heights where we have some townhomes. We'll move on from that. And again, some more side streets. So this is when We have some cycle track connections that come in from this cycle track here. This just shows you when a cycle track's on a smaller street, how it kind of goes through again. And again, some of these are repetitive, but we want to at least kind of show you what these looked like. So here's Winthrop Avenue. So this is today, 2 lanes in each direction. And again, I think this is generous at 10 feet today, but there's the curb, utility poles, and then again, our fence is literally right there today. This is what we're looking at doing in the future. So what we actually are looking at doing is, again, putting a landscape strip against Winthrop Avenue, putting a cycle track, and then having a sidewalk. And again, so what was before really an 8 to 10 foot width, we're really expanding it to a 30-foot public realm on the frontage of our site. And that'll be continuous from Beechmont roast beef, all the way to the edge of our site. And I think as Tom said before too, we're also looking at a community path that goes along the wetlands here. So that North Shore Road really does have a direct entry into the park system, which from our perspective is very important. Okay. I know those are riveting, but
Just one quick question. Some of the cross-sections, especially on Thomasella Road, are fairly broad when you add in the roadway, the sidewalk, the bicycle tracks and so forth. And on the other side of that is Stop and Shop, et cetera. Have you begun to look at the pedestrian crossing issues for those major thoroughfares?
yeah, I think that's something we're going to get into more in detailed design, but I will say this. So if I go back to the site plan, so I'm going to jump around, because I think the retail plan is important to show this. So as you know, our retail strategy is around 2 new retail squares or plazas that connect the Main Street district, but we purposely have that Main Street retail district going up this way. And part of the reason is that some point in the future, these will not be oil tanks or a suburban shopping plaza. And so the idea is that we are creating, which is purposeful right at the intersection, we're going to create this might even be a stoplight in the future, that there will be an intersection here that will really allow pedestrian-friendly crossing across it. And the other thing too is that the cycle track that goes through will respect it, so pedestrians will be able to get to the edge and the cycle track may actually veer in, so that pedestrians will only be really crossing at one time the 4 lanes across the street. So we don't have more detailed design, but this is a really important connection point that we'll be working on as we go forward.
Can you give us a little bit more detail about the bus shuttle you were talking about? Can you go back to the slide of how it connects to what you were talking about, and also is it free and open to the public, and how frequently does it run?
Yeah, so I think he's asking for more detail about the bus shuttles, where they are, how frequently do they run, is it open to the public? I think those were, is it free? I'm not sure about the free part yet. So a couple things I would say. So in the earlier phases when we start and we're just building phase 1, we may not have shuttles because we're within a quarter mile of walking distance of the actual T stations. But at full build out, there will be an inner loop and an outer loop shuttle system. And the idea is to connect both T stations throughout the entire part of the site. This is actually a slightly outdated plan. We've actually updated it. These shuttles actually both go here and then come back. So there's a one-way road now in here. So we got to update this plan, but because the idea is that we want to be next to both plazas basically and to connect them through. Frequency at full build out could be running every 4 or 5 minutes basically on this. We do want this to be open to the public. And again, in the earlier phases, they definitely would be low cost or close to free, but we haven't had that discussion internally yet at this point. But again, it gets robust as we build out the site.
What's the reasoning for potentially charging for that and having the parking be free?
It's again, a good example of this kind of shuttle system is like the Easy Ride that exists in East Cambridge today, right? So it's a shuttle system that I think they only charge $1 per ride. And again, it depends on the distance. I think in the earlier phases, we probably wouldn't be charging for it, or it'd be very low cost. It'd be definitely a service that is free to residents and tenants, but we have to talk about how we would work this. Again, this is early days, so I mean, it's a good question, but we haven't really gotten to the details of that yet.
Doug, I might just note one other important point, and it came up in Tom's presentation as well. There's a tremendous amount of detail and thought given to circulation within the site, and appropriately so. But very important to the community is the connection between the site and the surrounding community. And the shuttle, for example, is one way to connect the site to the surrounding community, especially in areas that don't have good Mbta service, and tends to minimize the parking demand as well. So you might think of that as a connecting link in the PUD and elsewhere.
Correct. And I will say this too. This is just showing how the shuttles get through the site. It doesn't preclude the shuttles from being off-site, having stops off-site. We've only started to broach the discussions with the MBTA. I think in 10 years, they'll be completely rethinking how their buses work through and around this area. At full build-out, there could even be a Silver Line extension coming all the way through here too, because of the potential demand to the Seaport District from our site. So then, I think the first thing to take from this is that we are committing to do a dual shuttle system, right? Which I think is a very important point, because there's some developers that would not do that. I think we're also trying to get away from companies doing a whole series of their own private shuttles on the site, and really it's also almost offered as an amenity too, as well as part of this, which I think is important. The second thing is our retailers are going to want it to be free, right? Because they're going to get people coming to the T stations that want to go through the site too as well. So I do think this is the beginning of the conversation. But I appreciate those comments. Okay. Tom gives me all the exciting topics. I'm going to go to infrastructure next. Yeah. So this may be hard to read. So this is about water and sewer. And so what you're seeing here is, again, if you recall, when we originally submitted for the first Mbta filing, we had two programs. We had a Program A, which was kind of a pro-Amazon program, a little more office space. And then we had a Program B, which had a little bit more residential space. That really is indifferent to the city of Revere, to be honest. Revere is at least 50% commercial, and we will never do more than 50% residential by zoning, right? But the reason why we show both of these is that there are differences in wastewater generation and water usage based upon the two programs, because if it's more residential, there's more wastewater and more water use. This just simply shows you the amount of, in Program A, the amount of gallons per day of sanitary sewage, and then gallons per day of water sewage. This is the Boston numbers, and this is the total numbers. And then again, they do go up if in the Program B, where there's more and slightly more water and slightly more sanitary. But just to getting through it, so I mean, Revere is almost 700,000 gallons per day. So this is a big site. So just to give you a sense. Again, this is over 20 years. But we wanted to at least show you those. And this obviously will be in the filings that we do. So now we're going to get to this really kind of the weeds. So here is the site, as we know, and outlined in blue. And what I'm showing you is the existing sewer system in the area. So in Revere, we have an 8-inch gravity sewer that goes this way, cuts up this way, then comes back to the site, and then it gets to a 36-inch wastewater interceptor, and then eventually gets into the MWA system. And then it basically goes through Chelsea Headworks to the Caruso pump station, and then from there, it's pumped basically over to Deer Island. Boston's system is right next to our site. They have a 30-inch gravity sewer line that goes all the way through the neighborhoods down to the Caruso pump station, and then that gets pumped and goes this way. And there's also a smaller system which is here too as well. Just existing conditions, just to give you a sense of it. So we spent a lot of time with the City of Revere, particularly DPW, as well as Bob O'Brien and his team. We spent a lot of time with Boston Water and Sewer Commission as well. And then most recently, we've been spending a lot of time with MWRA. And because, again, we're a fairly large project. So the proposal, which is actually, I think, a very good one for Revere, because Revere's system is very constrained right now, we are actually looking at taking the entire sanitary flow through Boston, which means that we would, maybe we may need some interim connections in Revere, but, so we have met with MWRA, and they are supportive of that, and I'll tell you, I'll get to the reason why they're supportive of that. But the reason why we do it is that it actually allows us to take all the sanitary, because it's actually a much closer route to get to the MWRA line. And the way it would work is that we would probably start with a temporary connection in Boston where we would go into their existing 30-inch line. But eventually, after 3 or 4 million square feet, we would actually build a dedicated bypass line that goes right to the MWRA line. We'd have our own small pump station on the site down in this area. And what it does, what MWRA likes about it is that, two, we don't have to go through the Revere system, which is very constrained. That's actually good news, because that means Revere can keep their capacity for other future developments, which I think is very important. Two, for MWRA, we're avoiding the Caruso pump station. So we're actually downstream of the Caruso pump station, which, again, going back to this, right now, currently, everything in Revere and almost everything in Boston goes to the Caruso pump station. So the fact that we're downstream of it keeps capacity for MWRA as well, too. So they're actually very interested in that, too, as well. And again, it's kind of a phased approach. Now, the one thing we're going to be working with Frank Stringy and the Revere TPW of, if we start here at Beechmont, it would be very expensive for us to pull all of this sewer line today to make that happen. So we may be looking for an interim connection through the Revere system for one of the earlier phases. It would only be an interim connection because the idea is that we would eventually switch all of the development over to this Boston connection. And again, we're doing something similar with Boston. At first, we want to connect to their existing system, so we have the time to actually build and construct the new bypass line. We actually did this at North Point too as well. We built the 4,000 linear foot line. Mike Borowski, by the way, worked a lot on that. And they were thrilled because we didn't have to go through Kendall Square. And so again, they kept capacity. So I think fundamentally this is a very strong plan. It's just that we're going to need to work with the City of Revere and City of Boston on some interim connections just to get us moving, for the earlier phases.
Doug, as you go through that in these interim phases, are there any points where you see any capacity challenges, either in terms of water supply or disposal capacity?
Yeah, correct. If we go back, we would not take the 8-inch gravity sewer because that's very constrained. We would probably do an interim connection down Revere Beach Boulevard to get to the 20-inch line that's there. Now, the other thing, too, to talk about, too, is that, and some of you may be familiar with this, MWA and DEP have a program where a developer, or even a city, a developer can't put another gallon of sewer into their system without taking out infiltration. They call it I&I. What that means is that we're older region, which means that there's a lot of combined sewer and drainage flows, which means we're pouring stormwater into sewer systems, which means Deer Island is treating rainwater. We also have a lot of leaky pipes. And so if we were to say build a project with 100,000 gallons of sewer going into it, we actually, through the city, have to take out 400,000 gallons at least of I&I, or in the case of Revere, almost 1 million gallons of I&I. So it means is that the system always has capacity, because if you're putting a gallon in, you've taken 4 gallons out. So we actually pay fees. We'll be paying fees both to the City of Revere and the City of Boston for these I&I projects. And they're not insignificant. They are on a building-by-building basis. So the first thing is, because of those, we won't, we'll be able to create capacity through the City of Revere. And again, it would be our cost to do a temporary connection. Now, we don't like temporary interim connections because they cost money and we're basically abandoning them. But again, the prospect of trying to figure out how to get that sewer line all the way across in the site, because again, the site's almost a mile across, is we'll go through that. So I'm going to switch to water. Again, very similar. So this is the kind of water, existing water. So today we actually get our water from the City of Boston for the clubhouse, I think, and we also do get water from the City of Revere, I think, for the horse barns. There's not much. There's nothing really out on Route 1A. There's a high-pressure system on the Orient Heights. And then obviously we actually have a City of Revere line, which they just upgraded recently to a 16-inch, I believe. And so what we've met with, again, we met with Revere DPW, we met with Boston Water and Sewer, and we had initial conversations about connecting to existing systems. City of Revere actually ran some initial modeling, which was very helpful to us. Boston Water and Sewer did as well. And they came back really quickly and said, yeah, don't connect to our line. And the reason was the scale of our development would pull so much water off that if we had a fire emergency, we'd actually see pressure drops in nearby neighborhoods, which obviously we didn't want. But so this was an equal result on both sides. Good news for us, or all of us, is that there are 3 MWRA lines in Winthrop Avenue today. And I think all 3 are high pressure. So the goal will be is that we would actually be coming off of 2 locations and 2 different MWRA lines to feed the site, which means that we won't be coming off of Revere's 16-inch line. Now again, and I don't think we need an interim connection either. I think the goal is we'd be tapping right off the MWRA line. What's that? So I think that I'm going to go back. Rich, you want to call it? I think it's one's a 24, Rich? Size of the MWRA lines. One's a 24-inch. I think that what's the... So 30-inch, 24-inch, 16-inch, all high pressure too. All right, so fairly significant water capacity. And the goal is that we're taking off 2 taps, one from 2 different lines to serve the Revere portion of the site. And Donnie Goodwin wanted to make sure of this too. There will be a Revere meter that will be, so really it's the MWRA selling water to the City of Revere through a meter, and then it sells to us. So Revere is still selling us it. We're just not tapping it off of the existing 16-inch Revere line. Boston would actually also have a connection coming off the MWRA line. It would actually cross through City of Revere property And then there'll be a Boston meter at the Boston property line. We're still working with MWA who owns that stretch. It might be them, it might be Boston with an easement. And then that would tap back into the high pressure zone on the Boston side, so they would have redundancy too as well. You know, and again, if we start from Beechmont, it's pretty easy in the water because these would be in the new streets we're building, so we would just do the new lines. So the good news there is that we're really not impacting the local Revere system. MWA is modeling this as we speak, and we're working with them on that. But again, that's how water would work. I'm going to pause. Any questions on water or sewer before I go to resiliency?
So to be clear, we sell you the water and you take care of the sewer. That's not a bad arrangement.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Correct. I'm not suggesting there's not going to be discussions with MWA or the City of Boston on those topics, but yes.
Any questions regarding that infrastructure?
I think he answered the question, but I just want to ask it again. So it's not going to affect, right now, Beechmont, the Beechmont Hills have very low pressure. With the new water line, we'll probably get better pressure. I've seen a little bit of improvement, but it's not going to affect the hills of Beechmont. Excuse me? Yeah, I could tell, thank you.
Yeah.
So by you pulling it from the Revere line, it's not going to affect the,
So we don't pull it from the Revere line.
Oh, okay.
We'll pull directly from the MWA lines.
okay,
So-
I
so-
don't know the difference, so.
So there's actually 4 water lines in Winthrop Avenue. One of them is a City of Revere 16-inch new water main, and there's 3 separate MWA lines. So we will not be touching this. We won't be tapping into the 16-inch Revere line. And we did that because the City of Revere gave us feedback on modeling that said that if we did that, we could potentially impact, water pressures, probably more in fire situations, but still, we just decided we move away from that. So, in the MWA system, I mean, given the 3 lines and the amount of pressure and volume they have, I don't think we're going to see any perceptible difference in the City of Revere at this point. So, but we'll be working with them and obviously with DPW.
Doug,
Yeah, so they're more regional lines. I don't know if Rich knows the answer to that, but I think they're regional lines. Some of these are lines that are just going past as well, too. No. Yeah. Correct.
Doug, if I may, on that Winthrop Ave line or Revere Beach Parkway line, from where they just started the new 16-inch, beyond that, westbound, from, say, North Shore Road where they started, going west up to Woods Avenue where the PRV is. Some of the lines there are in tough shape. Now, I'm not sure if they're the MWI lines or if they're our lines, but I know if we put any more pressure on any of those, there may be some issues because we've had a lot of breaks up there.
So we'll definitely work with the MWRA. I mean, they're studying it because we're tapping off of their system. Clearly, I don't think we'd be putting more pressure on the line. But again, it's a good comment, and we'll follow up with MWRA just to make sure that we're not having any downstream impact either. Okay. Resiliency. So again, this just goes back to, this is just a rendered version of the master plan, again, showing the open space system. This is hard to read, but this is kind of showing existing grading of the site. Again, the main point is that we're approaching climate change from a forward-thinking way, and we're lucky because we almost have a clean slate. We have 161 acres with no existing improvements, which is very different, say, from the Seaport District, which was honestly really fully built out from a roadway system before they really got into climate change or sea level rise in that part. So the idea is that we're talking about raising certain areas of our site to be outside of the current 100-year floodplain and raise it to the point where we won't be in the floodplain through 2070 or beyond. So that's kind of step 1. But step 2 is that we're actually purposely leaving some of the open space areas a little bit lower. And the idea is to create additional storage for major storms, whether it's a rainfall event, whether it's a coastal event. Sorry, I'm standing in the way. I'll back up a little bit. And so this just gives you a sense of what the site is. So currently today, the floodplain elevation is at is lower than 17.5. So the areas that are in the floodplain are really towards the horse barns today. And I think most of you know that there are low points into Beechmont Square and things like that. But some portions of our site are pretty high. So what this shows, and again, this plan is hard to read, but so the areas that are yellow or orange are for the most part above the 100-year floodplain, all right? And some of this is fill area, right? And when we say fill, we're talking 1 to 3 feet in some areas, maybe 4, but it's not really huge areas of fill. But the light green area is actually below the 100-year floodplain as we get into 2070, but it's purposeful again. And again, this is a 100-year storm event that is a pretty strong event. And what it allows us to do, it allows us to really create additional capacity that we can retain more stormwater onto our site, which is really important. Or if surge comes from the ocean, we have more areas to push it or gather it than we may have currently today. So if I go to it, so a couple of things we're also doing. Mbta has asked us to do a climate change study. And what that means is we're doing a detailed computer model looking at major rainfall events today, 2035, and 2070, okay? So going through that time frame. And we actually layer in up to 40 inches of sea level rise by 2070 in this analysis. And it'll show comprehensively how the stormwater works, both from a rainfall event as well as a coastal event, which will be, I think, really helpful. It'll show vulnerabilities not just on our site, it'll probably also show vulnerabilities around our site, like what you guys know, Bennington Street, around the school, Route 1A. And then we'll also, with that, start to identify potential mitigation solutions that better prepare the community as well as us for future stormwater change. A little about existing conditions too. We have one very beautiful pond out here. Outside of that, there really is no real stormwater control or detention on the site today. This site was built in the 1930s, so when it rains, you may know this, everything pretty much goes through detention or stormwater grates, and it goes right into Sales Creek. There's nothing holding it back today. We're designing this system to new guidelines that we're actually going to be retaining 8.8 inches in a 100-year storm, and I think it's around 6 inches for a 10-year storm, which is well above what people have been currently doing. And the idea is that we're expecting more extreme rainfall events. And I'm going to show you a series of slides that kind of shows you. So this is kind of the everyday condition, and you can see our wetland systems, the pond, and Sales Creek, and then that's our new detention basin, which is the outdoor performance theater. Oh, if it goes forward. So in a 2-year event, and these are stormwater detention basins, but it shows you how we're starting to capture some of this water. So we're starting to capture and drainage swales that exist in these linear parks. We have a detention area here that's at the end of the park. We also have subsurface infiltration systems. So we actually have, under the parks, we have large areas where we can actually hold large amounts of water. And so we put those in as well too. So there's a park in here as part of the linear park system. And we also do it under the plaza spaces too as well. In a 10-year event, you start to see, this is a bigger storm, and you can see how the water continues to fill up the site. And again, the good thing about this is that we're holding the water back. So again, today, everything crashes into Sales Creek today. We're actually holding it back and releasing it more controlled. And you get to a 100-year event, and again, we're really retaining that water, which is really important from our perspective. This is a good example. So here is the outdoor performance theater. And on a typical day, any day, there's detention in the bottom of it, If there's a 100-year major storm event, we have the ability, we've designed it so it can really fill up with quite a significant amount of volume of water. And this is just one area on the site. So this is how we're kind of thinking about it as we go forward, which is really important. You guys know this.
Could I just ask you to go back a few slides?
Yep.
You had yellow and green. The building sites were white. Are
Correct.
all the building sites being elevated above the floodplain?
So most of them are. There are some places where in 2070 it's hard for us to get, because again, Winthrop Avenue is pretty low. So we do have to transition back down to existing streets. The goal is that the majority of our buildings will be outside the 100-year floodplain. Where buildings start to get into the 100-year floodplain, the idea is we will move critical infrastructure, like the transformers will go up to the second floor. We won't have any ground floor residential units. So we can have retail, we can have amenity space, we can have lobby entrances, but we wouldn't have any kind of critical infrastructure too. And again, this is a storm event that happened, well again, it's supposed to happen once a year, maybe it happened twice, or once every 100 years. But it's not like the site's flooded for a week, right? It's the flooding that comes in with the high tide. It starts to go out. It may come back a little bit with the next high tide. Like there's a cycle to these types of storms that last several days. But that's how we'd be addressing. And part of that is the buildings around here. I'm going to show you another slide in a second to talk about the vulnerabilities, because the flooding that happens up in this area, first and foremost, is definitely coming up through Belle Isle around the school. And that's at least what
Which
we're
is sort of my next question, and perhaps you'll be addressing it
Yep.
as you go forward. But as you improve your water retention capacity on the site, will that have benefits for the surrounding area? Because there is a lot of flooding, as you indicated, particularly around Belle Isle Inlet and the surrounding neighborhoods. Will that be improved, unaffected, made worse by what you're doing on site?
Well, first, it should be improved because we're retaining a lot more water. Where today, it's just being simply released right into Sales Creek. So the volume will be improved in terms of peak runoff volume. When we study, I'm going to go forward because I think this will be good to see too as well. Our study area for the climate change model actually incorporates these. So our watershed, actually, I think this is the watershed here. This shows you the watershed of what flows through Sales Creek. It might be a little bit larger than this too. So our climate change model actually picks up both of these neighborhoods and beyond, right? So you'll actually see that, right? And we definitely in preliminary stuff have seen, just in current conditions, you know, these two neighborhoods definitely are getting low-level flooding. It seems to be more from rainfall events in terms of the system that it's trying to get through. And we've actually seen our site drains much quicker before these neighborhoods, so there may be some capacity constraints under Winthrop Avenue, which again, may not be new news to you. So I think we'll come back with more detail. We have to finish the model and run it, but we'll be able to show you real time, and it's actually a really cool model. It actually runs in real time. You can actually see a 24-hour storm, and it shows you kind of where the water goes, how it builds up, and then also how the site drains. And you can almost see a little bit with tidal action too as well. So.
Confluence of high tide and major rain events together that creates.
Yeah. Correct.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Doug? Yes, you can have it after. Probably about 15 years ago, there was a plan to dredge the creek. I think that is a big, that could be there was money allotted for that. I don't know where the money went, if they used it for, you know, the big dig or whatever they did. But at one point, they were going to dredge the creek. I do think that that would help in flooding, especially around the neighborhoods like Pearl Ave, Belle Isle Ave, Crystal Ave, Everett Ave, yeah, Bennington Street. So, I mean, just that little inlet was supposed to be dredged about 15 years ago, and there was money allotted. I don't know who the governor was at the time. It could have been Dukakis. It could have been a long time ago, but.
Yeah, so no, it's a good thing. We definitely have heard things similar to that. I can tell you that we do know that DCR dredged Sales Creek on the site because they spread the dirt onto the site, and that's why portions of it are raised. I don't know what happened further up, and to be honest, we don't know all the full details of that. I think when we show you the model that we're running, and the model is two models, right? Because what you just said is very important. It's actually two models layered. So one model is called the Riverine Model, which means we're studying rainfall event that comes into the Sales Creek watershed. And that shows a very specific level of flooding. It's all based upon rainfall and how it gets through the system. And it's actually a fairly small watershed here. That then is layered with a coastal model, which is a FEMA flood model, which is showing tidal surge also coming up. And the scenarios that we're doing, we're getting scenarios that eventually get so high that they do overtop Bennington Street, and the pumps can't work at one point. So we actually, you know, model into it what happens if the DCR pump station stops working for 4 or 5 hours or longer. And again, so I think it's good to show, and we actually show, it's actually, again, we don't have it done yet, but it's pretty cool to actually watch. But I think it will actually really help us understand too, based upon the modeling. And it's a 2D layered model, so it's a very highly detailed model. It'll show pretty quickly where what you guys are describing, the model actually shows. And the last storm, it showed flooding coming right through the school, overtopping Bennington Street, filling up the two wetlands areas between Bennington and the Mbta tracks. And you could actually see, and then when it drained, it went right back out the same way it came in. So it's actually, I think it's gonna be really helpful because it's gonna show, and I think I have a slide, I'm gonna go forward here. So I think it's not to jump forward. Oh, actually, I don't think we have it. But the weak points, and you can actually, this is a good one to show. So this is just showing you relative elevation. Again, blue doesn't mean you're underwater today. It's just low from an elevation perspective. But red's high, obviously Beechmont, Orient Heights, and you can quickly see this is actually, the blue lines are showing literally the floodplain. So Sales Creek as a system goes this way, but when the water comes back, it actually goes through the parking lot over the street and then starts to fill the system up that way. It also shows you, these are the low-lying areas in Revere. They are protected somewhat from the oceans because there's the higher beach walls and everything, but the whole watershed first drains into here before it drains through one pipe through Sales Creek. So we also get secondary flooding that comes across Route 1A because this is also the lower point. The reason why I'm showing this is that we have solutions for our site, but longer-term solutions for the city of Revere are really going to be revolved around what happens with Bennington Street or the MBTA tracks. Do they get raised? Does Bennington get raised? Does something else in between? And then when the oil tank farms get rebuilt, and this will be something to whoever picks up the oil tanks, the solution on Chelsea Creek is directly related to the oil tank properties. I mean, it may not be raising Route 1, that could be really expensive, but development on this side could literally lift and raise that, you know, almost create like a barrier so that the rest of the place is a little bit safer. So, but anyways, it's going to be very interesting.
An observation, I know Dan has a question. Some of the things that you're describing are outside of your purview or offsite, et cetera. But if in your model, you can give credence to the kind of offsite improvements that need to be made by others, that would be very, very helpful information. I'm not saying where your responsibilities begin
Yep.
and end, but wherever they end, if somebody else has to pick up the slack, you need to know what has to happen by whom, et cetera. And you'll probably have the best information on that, whether it's upstream of Sales Creek or downstream on Belle Isle Marsh.
To Bob's point, and Joanne, I know all of Beechmont would love to see the Belle Isle dredged. I actually had a conversation with Speaker DeLeo, reminded him it was almost 25 or 30 years ago that he was on the Beechmont Yacht Club when he first ran, and said he fought for the funding, secured the funding, and then the DEP came in and they had to test the mud. And the mud came back, the silt was so polluted, it was not cost prohibitive. Now, with the flooding study, with the everything that's going on, I think that's as huge. If you could be an advocate for us as we are an advocate for you, we can even get the East Boston neighborhood to have that dredge would be a huge piece of this project long term. And I know Speaker DeLeo would be on board.
No, I think it's a really good point. That's helpful for us to know too as well, because, I mean, we're going to be here for a long time, so we really are all in this together. And our goal is to identify both, well, first we're going to identify what the vulnerabilities are, which are going to be, I mean, you guys already know them, but it's going to show you how it goes over the next 50 years, which I think is going to be really important. The MBTA has asked for what are the impacts to the Suffolk Downs T station, the tracks, the Beechmont station. Beechmont is elevated, but if you can't get in the front doors because there's 2 feet of water in the front doors, it doesn't really matter. But those are things we want to go through. And then I think the next goal would be to look at, are there earlier term solutions that are easier fixes, you know, that might be around the school and thinking about, you know, the barrier type system. And then what are the longer term solutions, you know? And again, going back to this,
DCR is a big player as well.
correct. And the good news is that Bennington Street is very wide, and there's a lot of wide shoulders, but again, the study will help because it will confirm what everyone already knows who lives in this neighborhood, where the water is coming from. But there's definitely some potential solutions that really start to work that they don't have to be done in 2 years. But if we know what they are now, we can actually plan for them, or, you know, work with other developers besides ourselves to start, finding ways to, protect the site. In the
And will the
neighborhoods.
results of those study be available for your DEIR submission?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and yeah, I think we're running probably over 40 scenarios, courtesy of Mbta. So it'll be pretty comprehensive. And there's even one nuance that came up too. I think MBTA there's a certain gate or valve that sometimes they close between the neighborhoods. Like, we brought up some nuances that were brought up to us too that we'll be looking at too as well. All right, so I'm going to move away from climate change and resiliency. And this is a little bit of a repeat, but we're going to go back into a little more detail, I think, on phase 1. So again, most of you have seen this, but here is the Revere portion of the site that's shaded. As you know, we've already passed the zoning overlay district, which again covers the area in red. Proposed uses were outlined, proposed FAR, again, required to have a minimum of 50% commercial. and minimum 25% open space. And then obviously the heights and setbacks were included in there. Allowed uses, office, lab, retail, hotel, and residential. There's a much more defined use in the overlay district, but these are the general categories. And again, this just, zooms in on the Revere open space, or the master plan. So here is Beechmont Square. Here is the Innovation Center. This is a hotel. This is the Main Street Retail District. There's the Outdoor Performance Theater. That's that community path connection from North Shore Road. Obviously Sales Creek, beginning of the active linear park system. And it gives you a sense of that. This was the height zone map that was approved as part of the overlay district. I won't spend too much time on this. And this is the uses. And again, I think you guys have saw this last week, but again, orange is the hotel. These 3 buildings are mixed-use buildings, so again, residential over retail uses. Blue is the commercial buildings. This is a second hotel. And then these actually should probably be orange too as well. There is retail in this area, and then but the light is just residential. Just to review the program, 52 acres, 5.8 million square feet, minimum 2.9 million square feet of commercial, and maximum of 2.9 million of residential. And again, as the site gets built up, particularly if Amazon comes, those numbers might shift, but this at least is the base. So in here is the phase 1, and I'm not sure if you guys, did we show this last time, Tom? Yep, okay, good. So again, just, I don't mean to repeat myself, but again, this is the phase 1 program, which you guys are aware of. I don't know if we show this. This is more of a zoomed in. So this is the retail strategy with the first phase. So again, this is the incubator innovation space. That is the plaza space. And this just gives you representation of the type of places that we're looking at having. So we'd love to have a restaurant, coffee shop, cafe, maybe a wine bar, probably would be a bank. Because again, it's also about residential services. It's really important that we have places for people to bring their dry cleaning to on site, things like that. We would love to have a drugstore in the earlier phase on this site. And again, when we come back for site plan review, we'll have a better sense of what the retail we're thinking of for each phase, but this gives you a sense of what we're thinking of. But this is continuous street front retail, and again, we actually have a heavy amount of retail in this first phase. This just shows you, again, all the connectivity that we kind of go through. So again, this is pedestrian, bikes can go through the plaza. Again, this is the updated plan. Our shuttles actually come through this single one-way road and then go back into the site. We have the bicycle lanes on the side streets. So again, just kind of shows you more of the detail. And then the cycle track on Winthrop Avenue. We will be looking at, one thing we talked about before too, we are looking at how to bring the East Boston Greenway from Constitution Beach all the way up to Revere Beach along Bennington Street. We are working with VHB right now to see how do we get through Donnelly Square with this kind of community path. And we see it more as a community path, not a cycle track. Again, there's a lot of land width on Bennington and the shoulders until you get to Donnelly Square. And so we got to work on that as we go through it. So our hope is we get to the transportation meetings and later in July, we'll have some preliminary thoughts as what we can show you. This is just the ground floor plan. Again, kind of went through this. And these are precedent images of the Innovation Center. This is actually District Hall in the Seaport District. I think we're looking at more than just a one-story building for this, but the idea is it's going to be a distinctive character from our perspective and really being a place-setting type thing. And what that is a combination of, meeting space. It could be, work incubator space, some retail. It's all kind of mixed in, but it's a really dynamic place. And you guys have seen this rendering, looking back at Beechmont Station. We are working on a new rendering. I'm not sure when it's going to be ready. We've taken a photo from being right next to the Beechmont roast beef, looking at the existing site, and we're going to create a rendering that shows that exact same viewpoint when we get into the future. And I think, 'cause we've been always showing this shot, but we're actually going to turn ourselves around so that people can feel like, well, what is it like? Because today, it's kind of hard to have a vision when you're looking at the fence. And again, these were just the aerial renderings that you guys have seen before. So I think.
Could I ask a couple of questions, actually, in this last section about conservation issues and opportunities?
Yes, please.
Could you talk about, and again, you've made the point that you're beginning from scratch, so you can do this right from day one. What are your strategies for water conservation, water usage, not water drainage, for energy conservation? How do those strategies inform the type of architecture that you're considering for the buildings? Not just the systems within the buildings, but the energy efficiency of the structures themselves? And finally, related to infrastructure, what are you thinking about in terms of communications infrastructure? It occurs to me you're building a community, a neighborhood of the 20th century, which will be based on wired, wireless. 21st century, excuse me, I'm getting old. But, wireless technology, microfiber, et cetera. What are your plans for building that kind of capability in from day one? I know Billy Rogers worked on the Central Artery Project, and one of the unknown benefits of the Central Artery Project was the so-called utility relocation, which really created new microfiber communications technology for the city that will last for a century. How are you thinking about those things? How are you thinking about conservation, energy, water, et cetera?
Okay, so it's a lot of questions, Bob. I'm trying to remember all of them. You're going to have to keep me honest on what I'm answering. So let's talk about, I think, utility and telecom infrastructure first, because I think it's important. So Bills and Thomas, Rich Casano, who's here with us from Bills and Thomas, was our civil engineer at North Point. So we've done this before. We definitely had some lessons learned, right? So one of the things that we do, which is more with telecom and communications, we do centralized duct banks. Boston calls it the new telecom utilidor. Honestly, we were doing it at North Point 5 years ago, which basically means is that we do centralized systems where we actually group, not like 1, 2, or 3 conduits. We actually group 10 to 12 conduits on major roadways. We keep a lot of spares. And the idea is that we don't end up doing individual easements to Verizon's over here, Comcast is there, and it's all disorganized. We do a centralized system that feeds the entire site, and that's really important. And we lay it out as part of the infrastructure too as well. So I think that's one. And so that's really important. We also, there's been some new things coming on about how streetlights carry other modes of information too. So, and we've talked about doing site-wide Wi-Fi as well too as we go through it. And again, this is early phases, right? But the idea is that you could be on the site in the Central Park and have Wi-Fi access type of thing. Now, maybe Wi-Fi doesn't exist in I don't know, But the idea is we are trying to be forward thinking about it and making sure that we build in the space and the appropriate, for it. And the other thing too is we don't want to go back and dig up streets again. So we want to do it right from the beginning. So we end up with a lot of spare conduits, and then we do give licenses or easements within individual conduits. So if Comcast needs 2, great. If level 3, like a telecom provider or a light tower come out, okay, we got conduits for you guys. So we're really looking at spare capacity, which is really important. Water resiliency.
And does that infrastructure get built into the structures, the buildings themselves, as well as into the streets?
Correct, yeah. So buildings are evolving pretty quickly too as well. And a lot of it is more about, it's about space, So we have a lot more vertical risers in our central telecom closets now. Also in our office buildings, we're doing, I don't know if you guys see, there's a new wired score type out there that evaluates office buildings on their technology and how they do it. We actually are starting to do 2 telecom rooms on a floor, not just simply 1, and they're becoming larger so that there's more rack space, there's more backbone type of thing. It doesn't actually take a lot of space, it's just more thought planning of how does it get through the building, how does it get back out to the street type of thing, and to make sure that we could have 4 different tenants that want 4 different things. And so it's all about providing a service to our tenants and making it flexible. And you guys probably see this, there's a lot more open space planning too for office. I mean, the business climate is changing rapidly, even within office spaces. So, but we are trying to be forward thinking about that and making sure, and the other thing too, build it once and hopefully build it right, at least for 40 years. So we don't have to go dig up the streets 2 years later. And you guys won't let us dig up your streets either after you pave them. So, so water resiliency. So a couple things. So we typically capture rainwater to reuse as irrigation, right? Pretty typical. Most of our buildings do it. It actually helps us. We can do it more cost effectively versus than just drawing water off the system for irrigation. That is pretty typical. That happens. We end up doing a lot more green roofs as well too. It reduces heat island effect from our perspective. The Canopy tree plan that Tom showed was pretty purposeful in that we don't have any surface parking lots. All the parking is contained in the garages. So the idea is to have as many trees as possible, which is really important long term for a heat island effect and reducing it. That's why you have some streets that actually have double rows of trees on one side of the street, when we have those cycle tracks. So that's really important too as well. We'll clearly be using low flow toilets, things like that. And again, the idea is to really, conserve water when we can and reuse it as much as we can, and to really retain it on the site. And then going back to Boston Complete Streets, Boston Landing is probably the best example of this most recently. This is where the Bruins training facility is and where Celtics just opened up. If you walk on that street, you'll walk down the sidewalk and you'll see a tree, and there literally is a rain garden around that tree. So they actually redirect water. Instead of it just going into the street, into the storm basin, and then goes into, the detention basin, we're capturing a lot more rainwater off the sidewalks that go directly into landscape strips, which is really important too. So there's just all these ways we're trying to be more efficient with water. So that's how we're kind of approaching water. Talk about buildings for a second. So most of our buildings are LEED silver or LEED gold, for the most part. We've done, so 2020 was LEED silver. Boston Landing, which is Lanterra, 125 Guest Street, is LEED gold. The two buildings we're building right now in downtown Boston at the Government Center Garage are going to be LEED gold. LEED silver is fairly achievable in an urban district. LEED gold gets a little more expensive. LEED platinum is a leap. So I'm not sure we're there yet on some buildings. But we do look at that. And when we say that, we don't just look for a plaque. We're actually really into the LEED checklist, looking for what are the energy conservation methods, how do we reduce the energy use. So it is a really detailed thing. And we can come back and talk more about that, I think, as we go through it. But I think it's a very important thing for us as we go looking at this site. Solar as well. We are looking at 18 to 20% of the roof area potentially being available for solar. So again, our roof areas have a lot of competition for space. We have the mechanical systems. We also, our tenants and residents want outdoor space as well. But we also are looking at roof panels as well too. Massport, I'm not sure is on the same page yet, but we are a landing zone as well. But there are solar panels all around the airport, so we are looking at that. And MIPA's asked us to look at that, and I think we're trying to achieve 18 to 20%. So the buildings will be solar ready as well too. There really is not, even though it's very windy here, because of the flight paths and everything else, we don't have the height to really incorporate wind technology of scale at this point. And then as we come back for each building, I think the technology is moving pretty fast as well too on buildings. As we come back for each of the buildings, we can share the LEED checklist with you guys. We can tell you what we're looking at doing for each of the buildings. I think we can do that. But that's how we're kind of thinking about that too as well.
I would just note one thing with regard to that, which you can address if you can. There were comments on the EENF about energy efficiency in this context. There are a great number of energy efficient systems and types of equipment that can compensate for the inherent inefficiency of the structure itself. And the real win is if we can build an inherently efficient structure that is then leveraged and enhanced with efficient systems and equipment. And without going into the details of what kind of structures are inherently efficient or not, I would just note that we made reference to that, others made reference to that in these comments, and I think at some point it would be very helpful if you could share your thinking about what could be done in those regards.
So I can share our initial thinking. So Bob, you have a really good point. The most important thing about energy loss or energy use is the envelope of the building, right? And for many years, our industry has probably lost track of that, and I think we're getting back to it because it's basically you lose your heat through the windows or through the wall cavities or how it's beefed up. So that's become a really important point. I can tell you that our proposed buildings, and you'll see this, so the MIPA fund will have energy models. So we have required code, which includes stretch code, by the way, and you'll see what we're proposing, which is above code and above stretch code, which I think is the first thing. Part of that goes to window-wall ratios. How much glass do we have versus, solid walls? And there's always a balance between marketability and that type of stuff. We've also been asked to look at other stuff such as more aggressiveness. Someone's asked about passive house, so we'll have a section about passive house. Passive house is basically a approach to design where you reduce building use, energy use, by almost like 65%. Like it's a very aggressive approach. There's only been one done in Boston, and that's been in South Boston, and it's a small 30-unit type, 34-unit type deal. So I think it's still ahead of us right now. But we did do, for example, on the first two Amazon buildings, we were asked to look at the roof insulation. We normally would do like an R30. We did an energy model. We actually increased it to R50. And so we are thinking about that. But again, I think these details will come out as we come back with each building in more detail. But we're trying to push the envelope, but we're also trying to make sure we balance it with cost and how we're looking in the future.
And again, I would emphasize the importance, and when you think about infrastructure, including telecommunication infrastructure, of what you can do on-site that has benefits off-site. And I think particularly of Beechmont School across the street, for example, are there things that the existence of which on Suffolk Downs can enhance the attractiveness, efficiency, and telecommunications capabilities of a facility like that and others?
Yeah, I think the one thing that you guys will definitely see, which I think is going to be a benefit, because of the scale of the development, we're going to attract probably new providers, right, or new technologies to the site that aren't in Revere or even in East Boston today. And so the hope that, our goal is not just to be a benefit for our site, but the idea is we definitely want to look at ways to leverage that type of technology as it comes through, the city. And we saw that at North Point. We first got to North Point, yeah, there was Verizon and Comcast, there was no one else. Before we know it, we had Level 3 calling us up, and they were pulling lines, a half mile to get to our site because of the tenants that we had. And so there's definitely some opportunity, I think, as we go there.
Thanks. Going back to the infrastructure piece, in one area we saw the charts that showed the streets within the project and so forth. I guess the one area that we didn't see and wasn't discussed much was Washburn Ave. What's taking place along Washburn Ave? Because you've got a hotel, you've got apartment units there. Obviously, there's going to be more traffic and activity on that street. So what's being done there?
It's a great question. He says he has and the second question too. So first, so just to be clear, there is no vehicular connection to Washburn Avenue from our perspective. It's a side residential street today, and it should be tomorrow from our perspective. And then working with the counselors, McKenna as well as Novoselsky, we also have a setback. So we have a 30-foot buffer that's off of Washburn Avenue. And then there's building height setbacks as well. So the buildings are tiered. So they're not only pushed back, they're tiered. And we really see that as a landscape strip, buffer strip first. And we haven't even proposed any pedestrian connections or bicycle connections either. I mean, that's clearly something we're not opposed to per se, but the idea is that our site really goes to Beechmont Square and then goes down. And then we purposely also made this building so that it really links up with the Beechmont roast beef parcel, so that it really directs the flow of people and, activity to that area, so that Washburn can be what it is, which is a residential street.
And you have no designs on the east side of Washburn Avenue?
No, because there's way too many homes and it'd be complicated.
We got 161 acres. We don't need any more land.
Yeah. So, so anyways, that's the proposal there.
And I'll just one quick one that was the follow-up. Going back to the communications that Bob raised, and the whole area comes up with cell, and I'm assuming it follows along with everything else you were saying, because in Beechmont, we've got a terrific issue with cell capacity now, and I know they're trying to get some concentrators and things, and now this is only going to add to the problem. Yeah.
I should not go too far. So no, the question really asks about cell coverage and everything. Clearly, I think we're going to, the good news, again, similar, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, as soon as we start to build, they're going to be calling us, and they're going to be, because again, we're going to be adding a lot of cell phone users, and they're going to want to make sure the coverage continues to be really good, if not improved. So I think in some ways, again, we've already seen this. I mean, the amount of state attention now to this area, which wasn't here before, I think is really good. So I think we're going to see some positive effects.
I was wondering if you can speak to the timing of the buildings that are being put in for Phase 1 and the open space, both within that footprint of Phase 1 and the rest of the site. Like, when does the open space for active and passive use become available versus when the buildings go in place?
So we're just showing you Phase 1. I think at our next meeting, we do mix of uses. We will show the phasing for the whole Revere side, but also the Boston side too as well. So you guys can actually see Phase 1s on both sides and how it comes together. We will also have, sorry, I keep getting in the way over here. We will also have more detailed phasing as to the open space, because again, our goal is that as we build out, we're having 25% open space for each of the phases. What I can talk about just at a high level, the initial open space for this phase is partly the plaza area. There's also, it doesn't show well, there's also a green spine here, but the main piece of open space is really that plaza, which is honestly is a very expensive piece for us to build in the earlier phase. As we get to the subsequent phases, we would pretty quickly open that outdoor theater as well too. And then we'll start to, again, it starts to build into the site too as well. We're still working on what the open space phasing is going to be more, open space phasing will be more specifically, but again, that gives you a high level, and we'll have more detail at the next meeting. So.
The largest existing area, as you already pointed out, is the infield for the racing oval. Does that become accessible early on?
So the good news is that the racetrack doesn't go anywhere. So I think it's a really important point. We do have a minor issue, which is that this site was filled with urban fill. So maybe take a step back, and I'm sure we talked about the history. So this site was originally filled for speculative residential land development back in the 1900s. And it never happened. So then in the 1930s, it got picked up by the racetrack owners. And the good news is it's only been a racetrack. The only minor issue is that urban fill was brought in, right? So we do have low-level environmental conditions, which best practices are that we're supposed to cover all future open space with a foot of clean fill, which is, it's just best practice, right? It just limits any kind of issues or liability. Again, this is not a lead works factory or a PCB. I mean, it's just urban fill type thing. So we're still trying to work on a plan where we can open up maybe portions of, that track, to active or recreational use. We also have talked about, and this is probably more down the road, if we do a phase 1 at Beechmont, we do a phase 1 at Suffolk Downs, how do you connect between the two, right? Without just walking through the wasteland of parking lots that exist today. So I think we're going to be thinking about that as we go forward. And so, I mean, we would love to open it up today, but that has implications, and we don't want to overpromise something, because for us to actually go put a foot of clean fill across the whole infield today, which is 15 acres, that's a very expensive proposition in the earlier phases, right? So one of the things that works for us is that we can phase the open space and the infrastructure throughout the site, which makes it a more successful development. But it is a good question. So, and again, I think it's something that we need more time to think of, but we will be coming back next time and specifically show you, okay, when do the portions of open space go with which phase? And the goal is that we do want to get to the full Central Park as soon as we can. It's probably more related to the second phase or parts of the third phase. Because again, the site's so big, it's hard for us to redo that whole park right up front.
Two other quick observations that may anticipate the discussion next time, but from the larger perspective, how do you see in the open space in particular a role for public art, number one, which can make some of these spaces very distinctive and iconic and interesting and attractive, also has some issues associated with it. And the second thing is Revere and Boston have been working on the idea of an ADA accessible playground for children who are challenged physically and otherwise. And this seems like it might be a possible home for that. And I would give some thought to that opportunity, because it would be unique in the area, and I think particularly appropriate for a forward-thinking development like this.
So Bob, we definitely agree. And well, two things. Any park space that we build, first of all, has to be ADA accessible, right? Yeah, no, first. No, yeah. But we definitely agree that we could do something really special here that is an ADA playground or an interactive space. And I think you may have also seen some of the precedent images. Our goal is, look, we may have some more standard type playgrounds, especially because we have some parks here, kids love the playground structures. But we're also starting to look at, there's a lot of precedent images for other types of play space that are much more innovative, that are fully ADA accessible, which I think is a really important point. I think the other thing, too, to go through it is that someone talked about dogs. We will have at least 2 dog parks on this site, right? And I think it's really important because that's become a really important amenity, too, for our residents, which will hopefully relieve some of the pressure on Belle Isle Marsh as we go through it. We have an opportunity to do a lot of different types of active spaces, and it's meant to serve a very broad demographic, from those that are 2 years old to those that are 75 years old, right? So it's really meant to be really broad, because this is not just a place for this is a community from our perspective. I'm missing something, but can you go back through some of your public, oh, thank you, yes. So I guess there are 3 themes that we want to put out there regarding the kind of the open space. First is, there are some really cool historical elements that exist today on the site. We have, you'll see them. There's the finish pole lines. There's the starting gates. We have, I don't know if you guys noticed, you walk in, there's horse head statues, which are really cool, flagpoles. The idea is that we're doing an inventory this summer to try to find all these unique elements and take them, preserve some of them, and then actually put them into the open space system. And there might also be one very important interpretive place as well, too. But the idea is that people get a sense of history throughout the site. That's kind of one. 2, public art. Definitely love public art. I mean, I think the idea is that, especially in the central space as well, too, we have a real opportunity for public art. How you do that, how you manage it, Bob, I mean, I think that's something we're going to have to work through as we go through it, but I think it's really important to us. The other thing, which goes back to this overall canopy strategy, too, is that going to different neighborhoods, there's a native species approach to the trees, to the landscape, and to the environments that actually will shift from neighborhood to neighborhood, too, as well. And I don't want to call it as far as an arboretum, type of thing, but the idea is that this Central Park actually becomes fairly heavily landscaped, and our goal is to make it very interesting. So it's not to be a monoculture type thing. We really want a variety of trees and everything. Some things may actually cross through, like the Main Street may have a certain feel that crosses through all the neighborhoods because it has this connecting element. But as you can see, the reason why there are different colors on the trees and everything, because the open space strategy, and we'll have a more detailed presentation as we go forward, the idea is that this neighborhood will have a certain character of trees and distinctiveness, which is different maybe from the central neighborhood versus Belle Isle Square versus the Central Park. And these are actually groves of trees. So these little dense pink areas, these are groves of trees that are flowering trees. And again, with a real strong look at native species. Let me say one more thing on that too. Going back to wetlands, so we have a lot of invasive species today in Sales Creek and elsewhere. We'll be actually looking to heavily manage those to get rid of those and actually have more wetland-based native species that go through this system. So,
it's wonderful that you say that you want to continue the foliage into Beechmont, because Beechmont is a heavy populated area with airplanes, and we get inundated with fuel and soot and noise pollution, and trees act as a barrier. So, and we don't have enough trees. If you look out there, you can see the hill of Beechmont. You never could see houses. Now we're losing the trees. People are cutting them down. They're getting diseased. They're falling down. So this is a wonderful topic, maybe that the Beechmont Improvement Committee can talk about, to get more trees into Beechmont and to help with the pollution.
no, we're definitely happy to talk about it. I think the
Thank
other
you.
thing, yep. I think the other thing too to talk about too, and this was at North Point. So again, we had a 5-acre park in North Point, which we managed to maintain privately. When our trees die, because they do die, right, even when they're younger, we take them out, we replant them, right? So again, we are maintaining this landscape, at least on our site, and we're happy, obviously, to talk about off-site improvements too as well.
Yeah, DeVoe?
No, it's okay.
I would just remind everyone, we are approaching the witching hour, so we
Okay.
want to finish
It's
it.
going to be a short and sweet question, I guess, and I don't know if the answer is short and sweet, but talking about the trees, and I look at that area in Phase 1, I don't see a lot of trees, unless I'm looking at it wrong.
So I'll go back this way. I killed my pointer too now from now on. All right, so a couple of things. So all of these are trees here. These are trees here. There's another tree line here, a tree line here. This is the plaza space, so there are trees in it, but it's also meant to be open.
Looking at all those other areas around there.
Well, so these are buildings. So the one thing is not showing here, on the buildings, we do have what we call their roof decks, right? So again, we have enclosed parking that go up a couple stories, and there's a roof deck over it. There likely will end up being trees and other things that are in these courtyards for those buildings. We haven't designed it yet, though. So this was just meant to show the streetscape and how important it is to have continuous trees. The other thing, too, this is an earlier plan. Again, there would actually be 2 rows on Winthrop Avenue, because again, we have the planting strip next to the curb, cycle track, and another planting strip. So this is more diagrammatic as opposed to, yeah, the buffer too as well. Yeah, this is going to be a heavily landscape planted buffer.
Yeah, so maybe the chart's not doing it justice, but,
Yep. Yeah, and again, the scale of this plan, I mean, it's representational of the concept. The scale of this plan is probably off because, you know, there's a lot more landscape that's going to show up there. And so as we come back with detailed plans, you guys will see that.
Just so Ira doesn't have to ask the question, how much of the Winthrop Avenue buffer will be done in phase one? Will it stop at the end of phase one or continue up Winthrop Avenue and the boulevard?
Bob, you told me no hard questions today. Oh, the cameras are rolling too, Bob. That's, you know. All right, a couple of things. So it actually goes back to something, Counselor, you talked about earlier too. So today you guys may remember that Tomasello comes straight out and ends here. It's actually very close to North Shore Road today, the existing Tomasello Road exit. One of the things that we're looking at doing, which will likely happen with phase one, is that we're actually realigning Tomasello to come out mid-block between North Shore Road and the Winthrop Avenue Revere Beach Boulevard intersection, purposely to get better queuing storage between both of those so the whole corridor works more efficiently. And we'll talk more about that when we come back with a traffic study. Bob and his team and Frank have been really helpful. They have given us the plans to 205 Revere Beach Parkway, so we have seen those plans. We've actually met both with Bob, but also met with DCR, just reviewing what 205 Revere Beach Parkway is doing. Because obviously we weren't here when they started that project, so we're making sure that what their improvements are, we may make further improvements to what they're doing, but we obviously need to continue to go through that. Our sense is there's no question that Winthrop Avenue will be completely reconstructed along phase one of our project. If we do this as part of the first phase, which we have to do, we think we'll end up reconstructing it all the way up on that side. Now, it'll be the cycle track and the sidewalk, but then that'll be, because again, we have building pads beyond that, so we're not starting those buildings. But I think the goal would be, it's at least this, and it very likely could be the whole thing, especially if we move the street, because once we move the street, then we should just do the whole edge of the road. So, and again, we're trying to be careful because this is a very expensive project and we're building a lot of infrastructure, so we're just trying to control. We'd love to do the whole thing. I don't want to overpromise until we know what the road is going on with Tomasello.
You're thinking properly, though. Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Doug and Tom, for that very informative presentation. I also want to just alert people that we will not be meeting in 2 weeks' time because of the 4th of July week. We will be meeting on July 11th, and when we do meet, we will be discussing the very critical issues of use: residential, commercial, institutional, retail, parking, other uses, community uses, open space, etc. A very, very, very critical discussion that will happen on July 11th, and we will also get into the issues of the implication of those uses for municipal services and infrastructure elsewhere in the city. So it's a very important one. We hope that you can all make that. And I will just ask the mayor to close, given the fact that he came all the way here from Worcester to be here. And Mr. Mayor, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Tom, for the presentation. Fantastic, as always. And I want to thank everyone who took time out of their busy schedules to be here this evening. I really appreciate the fact that you've been willing to participate and be part of this process, and look forward to all the great feedback that you have, and especially our ward councilors who are very helpful and have a great sense of what's going on in their neighborhoods and what the concerns are. So thank you guys, and just look forward to our next meeting on the 11th, and I hope everyone comes prepared with lots of good questions and good input. So thank you.
2 minutes to go. We will move to adjourn.